Hours before the memorial, a private briefing allegedly turned ceremonial planning into a silent power struggle. Catherine's place had not been chosen by accident. It was approved, defended, and presented as non-negotiable, leaving one disturbing question. Who wanted the Princess of Wales visibly placed behind Camilla? Inside the palace, ceremonies were never treated as simple gatherings. Every entrance, every seat, and every step carried meaning. Long before the royal family arrived, officials had gathered to map the procession with almost military precision. Rank mattered. Seniority mattered. Public perception mattered even more. On paper, the arrangement looked orderly. Behind closed doors, however, it became a contest between rival households, each determined to protect its influence and prevent the other from appearing stronger. Catherine's advisors had expected a familiar formation. She would walk beside William, or the couple would follow directly behind Charles and Camilla as the next king and queen. That position would reflect the line of succession and present the monarchy as stable, united, and prepared for the future. But the revised instructions told a different story. Catherine was placed behind Camilla, while William was directed elsewhere in the procession. The separation was subtle enough to be defended as routine, yet powerful enough to weaken the image of the Prince and Princess of Wales as a united force. To Catherine, this was not an innocent adjustment. She did not question Camilla's title or deny her place beside the king. Her objection was more personal and more dangerous. She believed the formation had been designed to create one lasting impression: Camilla leading, Catherine following. Not unity. Submission. William began asking questions. But the answers only deepened his suspicion. Officials repeatedly called the arrangement standard protocol, yet no one could explain why it differed from previous ceremonies. When he requested to know who had approved the change, the responses became careful, vague, and defensive. It appeared that everyone had authority to enforce the decision, but no one wanted responsibility for creating it. Charles had reportedly been told that the plans were settled. Whether he examined every detail remained unclear. His silence may have been interpreted as approval, or perhaps used by advisors who knew few would challenge an instruction believed to carry the king's authority. Then came the warning. An unnamed senior courtier quietly told William that any public alteration would embarrass Charles and appear to undermine Camilla. William was being forced into an impossible choice: remain loyal to his father's ceremony, or protect Catherine from a position she believed had been chosen to diminish her. And beneath that choice lay an even older wound. The argument was not only about precedence. It touched future queenship, Diana's legacy, and the emotionally charged royal jewels that still carried her memory. The procession had become a symbol of something the palace had tried to keep hidden. Two royal eras were beginning to collide before the first had ended. What appeared to be a disagreement over a few footsteps was therefore connected to something far more explosive: the struggle over which woman would control the monarchy's image, memory, and most emotionally powerful symbols. The palace could control the procession, but it could not control the memory walking beside Catherine. Behind the argument stood Diana, her title, her jewels, her suffering, and the unspoken fear that Catherine's rising influence was reviving a legacy Camilla could never completely escape. That memory had never truly left the royal family. It remained hidden beneath polished ceremonies, careful statements, and years of public restraint. Catherine had never tried to become Diana, yet the comparison followed her wherever she went. The same public hopes once placed upon the late Princess of Wales were now being carried by the woman beside Diana's eldest son. Every gesture of warmth, every moment of calm under pressure, and every sign of loyalty to William strengthened a powerful idea inside the monarchy. Catherine represented not only the present, but the future Diana had once been expected to share. Her position beside William therefore carried enormous meaning. Together, they formed the next chapter of the crown. Separating them in the memorial procession was not simply a ceremonial decision. To Catherine's household, it weakened the image of continuity between Diana's lost future and the reign William would one day inherit. The tension became even more sensitive when royal jewelry entered the dispute. Several pieces associated with Diana had become symbols of far more than beauty. They represented public affection, emotional legitimacy, and the painful history William had never forgotten. Palace whispers suggested Catherine had originally been expected to wear a meaningful jewel connected to Diana at the memorial. Then came a quiet recommendation that she select something less historically charged. No official explanation sounded threatening. That was how the palace worked. A suggestion could carry the force of an order, and a small change could hide a much larger fear. Camilla's circle reportedly worried that Catherine appearing in a powerful Diana-linked piece would dominate the event, revive old comparisons, and leave the Queen standing beneath a shadow the monarchy had spent decades trying to soften. Catherine began to see the jewelry advice and the procession order as part of the same pattern. One removed a symbol, the other changed her place. Together, they seemed designed to reduce the emotional authority she carried through Diana's memory, William's devotion, and her future role as queen. For William, the issue cut deeper than protocol. He saw palace officials once again attempting to control a royal woman's image while dismissing the personal cost. Childhood memories returned, conflict, silence, and the terrible consequences of allowing appearances to matter more than dignity. He did not want to repeat the public warfare that had destroyed his parents' marriage, but remaining silent while Catherine felt cornered seemed like another kind of betrayal. Camilla, however, viewed Catherine's resistance through a colder political lens. If courtiers began treating the Princess of Wales as the monarchy's emotional center, they might start viewing the current queen as temporary, already turning their loyalty toward William's future reign. Years of careful politeness were beginning to crack, and before the procession began, the two women would finally speak without the protection of ceremony. By the time the memorial procession formed, both women were carrying far more than ceremonial expectations, but before Catherine stopped walking. She and Camilla had already faced each other in a private exchange neither household wanted exposed. Away from the public, Camilla allegedly delivered a calm but unmistakable warning. The monarchy could not function if Catherine questioned every instruction carrying the Queen's authority. Catherine's response was equally controlled and far more dangerous because she made clear that respect would never mean surrender. The exchange took place shortly before the memorial, after Catherine's household quietly raised concerns about the procession order. What began as an attempt to avoid embarrassment quickly became something far more personal. There were no raised voices and no open accusations. That made the tension sharper. Every word carried the weight of titles, history, and a rivalry neither woman could afford to admit existed. Camilla reportedly defended the arrangement as a matter of discipline. Royal ceremonies, she argued, could not be shaped around private discomfort. There had to be order. There had to be hierarchy. Once officials began allowing personal objections to alter carefully prepared plans, the authority of the crown itself would begin to look uncertain. Catherine listened, but she did not retreat. She explained that her concern was not about walking behind the Queen. It was about being separated from William in a way that seemed designed to send a deliberate message. To her, the formation did not communicate unity. It created an image of Camilla leading, while Catherine appeared isolated and visibly lowered. Camilla's answer was direct. As queen, she could not be seen negotiating her position with the Princess of Wales, especially before senior relatives, officials, and international observers. Any public adjustment after Catherine's complaint could make it appear that Camilla's authority depended on the approval of the woman who would one day take her place. That was when Catherine reached the emotional heart of the dispute. Genuine authority, she argued, did not need public humiliation to prove itself. The words were carefully chosen, but their meaning was impossible to miss. Diana's presence entered the conversation without needing to be fully named. William's sensitivity to the treatment of royal wives was well known inside the palace. Camilla warned that his instinct to protect Catherine could damage his relationship with Charles if he were encouraged to challenge every decision he disliked. Catherine's response came without hesitation. William was not being controlled. He was capable of seeing unfairness for himself, and she would not accept the suggestion that his loyalty to his wife was evidence of manipulation. The conversation ended exactly where it had begun, with neither woman willing to move. Camilla believed Catherine would obey once the ceremony began, and the pressure of the moment closed around her. Catherine had reached the opposite decision. She would not participate in a formation she believed had been deliberately created to diminish her. A nearby aide had heard enough to understand the danger. Quiet warnings moved between both households, but there was no longer time to redesign the procession without admitting a serious dispute had taken place. William still did not know how firmly Catherine had drawn the line. As the memorial approached, she carried that decision in silence, knowing the first few steps could expose everything. Catherine had drawn her boundary in private, but it was William who would turn that boundary into a public declaration, and his decision would force Charles to confront a threat he had spent years trying to prevent. When Catherine stopped, William understood immediately that this was not hesitation, it was refusal. In one irreversible movement, he abandoned his assigned place, stepped beside his wife, and showed the entire institution that when palace duty collided with Catherine's dignity, he would no longer remain obedient. For a brief moment, the entire procession seemed to lose its rhythm. Catherine remained where she was, calm but unmoving, while an aide made a discreet gesture toward the position prepared for her behind Camilla. The signal was subtle, almost invisible, but the message was clear. Move now, follow the order, do not create a scene. Catherine did not respond. William saw it all. He saw the pressure, the expectation, and the quiet demand that his wife surrender without protest. He had only seconds to choose. If he followed the formation, Catherine would be left standing alone, and the palace would have its image of obedience. If he stepped toward her, everyone would understand that the arrangement had failed. William moved. He left his assigned place and positioned himself beside Catherine, creating a new formation no courtier had approved, and no official could reverse without drawing even more attention. It was an act of protection, but it was also something larger. By standing together, the future king and queen refused to appear divided. They no longer followed behind Camilla as separate figures. They moved forward as one. Camilla became aware of the change only after the procession had started. By then, reacting openly would have made the tension impossible to hide. She continued without turning, forced to carry on as though nothing had happened. Even as the altered order silently challenged the authority her advisors had tried to establish. Charles noticed too. He understood the danger immediately. Stopping the procession would confirm that William had rebelled. Allowing it to continue would make the new arrangement appear accepted. With the entire ceremony hanging in the balance, the king chose silence. But that silence did not mean approval. Senior courtiers watched William with growing alarm. His decision suggested that he was no longer willing to wait for the next reign before exercising his influence. He had not issued a command, yet the whole procession had changed around him. That was the real warning. For William, however, this was not simply about power. It was about memory. He knew what silence had cost Diana. He knew how quickly royal duty could become an excuse for humiliation, isolation, and emotional damage. To leave Catherine unsupported would feel like repeating the very failure he had spent his life trying to escape. Catherine felt protected, but also deeply unsettled. William's gesture would not be judged as a husband standing beside his wife. It would be seen as the heir challenging the king and queen in public. The altered formation was noticed immediately, and speculation began before the memorial had even ended. Was it accidental? Was it planned? Or had the public just witnessed a royal fracture no statement could conceal? After the ceremony, William ignored the officials waiting to speak with him. He walked past without explanation, making it clear that the real confrontation had only been delayed. The memorial ended, but the silence inside the palace was more dangerous than any public argument, because Charles now had to decide whether William's defiance would be forgiven or formally answered. Before the palace could dismiss the incident as confusion, Charles summoned William to a private meeting. There were no cameras, no ceremonial smiles, and no carefully written statements, only a father demanding loyalty and a son insisting that the monarchy had crossed a line with Catherine. The effort to contain the damage began almost immediately. Palace officials quietly suggested that the altered formation had been caused by timing, space, and last-minute logistical adjustments. Nothing unusual had happened, they insisted. There had been no disagreement. No one had refused anything. But the explanation was too neat, and those who had watched closely knew the silence surrounding the incident carried more weight than the official words. Charles did not wait for the speculation to grow. He called William in alone, deliberately leaving Catherine outside the discussion. The decision was meant to prevent the meeting from becoming a direct battle between the king's household and the Princess of Wales. Yet excluding her only made the argument more personal, because William entered already convinced that Catherine had been treated as the problem rather than the target. Charles began with restraint, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. He accused William of embarrassing Camilla and turning a solemn memorial into a display of family division. The ceremony, he said, had been arranged to honor someone else. It was not the place for public defiance. William refused to accept that version of events. The humiliation, he argued, had begun long before the procession moved. It had been created by advisors who believed Catherine could be separated, pressured, and ordered into a position she found deliberately diminishing. His intervention had not caused the crisis, it had exposed it. Charles warned that a future king could not obey protocol only when it suited his emotions. Duty required discipline, especially when personal feelings threatened the appearance of unity. That was where William pushed back hardest. Protocol, he said, had become a shield behind which personal agendas could hide. Again and again, the institution protected its image while ignoring the human cost paid by those trapped inside it. Then, the conversation reached the wound neither man could discuss calmly. William invoked Diana. He spoke of silence, control, and the damage caused when palace officials managed a royal wife's public role while dismissing her private pain. Charles reacted sharply. He rejected the comparison and warned William not to use his mother's memory as a weapon against Camilla. But William made his position clear. Supporting Catherine was not an attack on the Queen. It was a refusal to repeat the same mistake under a different name. Charles allegedly raised the possibility of limiting William and Catherine's roles at future ceremonial events unless they agreed to follow instructions. William still refused to offer a public apology. He left the meeting without compromise, and the distance between father and son suddenly felt larger than ever. Yet, while father and son fought over loyalty, Camilla's advisors were preparing their own response, one that targeted not William's title, but Catherine's access to the royal symbols that made her so powerful. Inside the monarchy, punishment rarely arrives as an open command. It appears through vanished invitations, altered seating, withdrawn jewels, and doors that suddenly refuse to open. After the memorial, Catherine allegedly discovered that several privileges connected to her future role were quietly being reconsidered. The first sign came without accusation. Catherine's household received notice that a major royal jewel, previously expected to be available for an upcoming engagement, might no longer be released. The language was careful. There was no mention of punishment, no reference to the memorial, and no direct refusal. Instead, officials spoke of conservation, scheduling, suitability, and the need to protect delicate pieces from overuse. But the jewel carried more than financial value. It was linked to earlier queens, royal continuity, and, according to palace whispers, Diana's memory. Wearing it would have strengthened Catherine's image as the woman standing at the center of the monarchy's future. Withdrawing it sent a very different message. Access could be given, delayed, or denied by those who controlled the present reign. Camilla's household insisted the decision was administrative. William saw retaliation. To him, the timing was impossible to ignore. Catherine had refused the procession order, he had broken formation to support her, and now one of the crown's most powerful symbols had suddenly become unavailable. It was punishment disguised as procedure, subtle enough to deny and sharp enough to be understood. Catherine was urged to avoid another clash. Advisors suggested she accept a less significant piece and allow the dispute to fade. But she recognized the danger in surrendering quietly. If the palace could remove one jewel after the memorial, it could repeat the same tactic with invitations, ceremonial roles, and future privileges. A pattern would be established, and each new restriction could be defended as routine. The argument also opened a deeper question the royal family rarely discussed openly: which jewels belonged personally to individual women, which belonged to the crown, and who controlled them during Charles's reign. The answer was not merely legal. It was political. Whoever controlled access controlled the symbols of legitimacy. Camilla reportedly wanted firm boundaries created before William became king, ensuring Catherine could not assume that every powerful piece would automatically pass into her hands. To her advisors, this was protection of royal order. To William, it looked like an attempt to limit his wife's future before that future had even arrived. He considered exposing the dispute, but the risk was obvious. A public battle over diamonds and tiaras could be twisted into vanity, making Catherine appear obsessed with luxury rather than targeted through symbolism. So Catherine chose a quieter weapon. She prepared to attend the next major event without any borrowed royal jewel at all. The absence would speak louder than accusation. Charles now saw the crisis widening beyond one procession. It had become a struggle over titles, inheritance, memory, and the future balance of power. Before it could harden into open warfare, an older royal known for blunt honesty decided to intervene. As the palace prepared for another ceremonial showdown, one senior royal stepped between the two households, not to restore peace, but to reveal who had truly ordered Catherine's humiliating position. The final shock did not come from Catherine, William, or even Camilla. It came from a senior royal who had seen the original procession plan and knew it had been altered. The order placing Catherine behind Camilla had a name attached, and it was not the name everyone expected. Princess Anne had watched the conflict spread from one awkward moment into a dangerous struggle between royal households. She had seen Charles and William pulled further apart, Catherine's position quietly restricted, and Camilla's authority questioned from behind closed doors. Unlike the advisors surrounding them, Anne had little patience for carefully disguised power games. She understood protocol, but she also knew when tradition was being used as a weapon. Her intervention was private and direct. Anne confronted Charles with the earliest approved version of the memorial plan. In that document, William and Catherine had been placed together, following Charles and Camilla as a united couple. Catherine's disputed position had appeared only in a later revision. The change had not been inevitable. It had been added. According to Anne, the alteration came from senior household officials who wanted to reinforce Camilla's precedence. They may have believed they were protecting the Queen rather than acting under her direct command. But that explanation created a new problem. Camilla might not have designed the arrangement herself, yet once Catherine objected, she defended it as a test of royal authority. Charles could no longer dismiss the crisis as family sensitivity. Competing palace teams had begun using ceremony to advance influence, creating separate courts within the same monarchy. Every procession, invitation, and jewel could now become part of a silent contest between the current reign and the one waiting behind it. William refused to accept that the alteration was merely an administrative mistake. Advisors had acted with confidence because they believed the king and queen would protect them. Someone had expected Catherine to obey, and someone had assumed William would remain silent. Catherine did not demand revenge. Her response was calm, but firm. Any future arrangement affecting her public role had to be agreed directly between the households. She would no longer accept anonymous instructions presented as unquestionable tradition. Camilla was left trapped. An apology could make her appear weak and confirm that Catherine had forced the Queen to retreat. Refusing to acknowledge the mistake, however, could permanently damage her relationship with William and Catherine. Charles ordered a review of ceremonial planning, hoping procedure could repair what pride had broken. It satisfied no one. Instead, it revealed how fragile the balance had become. From that moment onward, every procession, balcony appearance, seating plan, and jewel choice would be examined for signs of revenge or reconciliation. William and Catherine remained united, but their defiance had changed their position inside the family. They had defended their dignity, yet they had also declared that they would no longer wait silently for their future authority. The memorial was never the end. It was the first public crack in a deeper battle over who would control the monarchy's next chapter, and which queen would ultimately define it.